I have been honored to work with Pete and Heidi for years, all kidding aside. This is a group that is on the forefront of providing information, training, and education to parents and people with disabilities. And I'm honored to help and be with them however I can. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about supported decision-making, but in my favorite way to talk about supported decision-making. We're going to talk about it in a way that shows how we can use it, how it is a part of the services and supports and programs that people with disabilities use every single day. Today, we're talking about my personal favorite program for people with disabilities, vocational rehabilitation. My hope today, you're going to learn a little something about vocational rehabilitation, or VR, but more importantly, you're going to see how supported decision-making is, can, and should be part of every step in that process to make sure that the people who are receiving VR services have the best chance to get the best opportunity to get their best job, while at the same time gaining the skills and supports they need to live their best lives. So with that in mind, let's begin. Let me share my screen and we will begin. So what I want you to think about first, and I'm going to start, if you've ever been to a webinar with me, with the last one about special education, you know I like to start with what I call an article of faith, something that we can use as a rock for the rest of the presentation, the idea that's going to carry us the rest of the way through. And for me, that one for vocational rehabilitation, as well as so many other programs, is this: self-determination. People with disabilities who have more self-determination, who have more control over their lives, who make more choices in their lives, have better lives. Let me repeat that. We have 40 years of studies that say when people with disabilities have more control over their lives, when they do more things, when they make more decisions, when they are directing their lives are better. They are more likely to be employed and earn more money, more likely to live independently, and more likely to be integrated and part of their communities. So how can we get there? How can we empower people with disabilities to have more control over their lives? A great way is supported decision-making. There's a definition of supported decision-making on your screen. It's one you can find in textbooks. It's one you can find in Google Scholar. I wrote it, and as I've mentioned before, I hate it. I think this definition is far too academic for something as basic as supported decision-making. So you can look at it and you can see it's people with disabilities working with friends and family members and professionals to help them understand the situations and choices they face so they may make their own decisions. In other words, it's exactly what we do every day. And that's how I want you to think about supported decision-making. That is the way to view it and do it. Supported decision-making is nothing more or less than getting the help you need to do the things you need to do and make the decisions you need to make. It's what we do every single day. Think about all the cliches we use about decision-making. Don't go off half-cocked. Don't make a snap judgment. Don't rush to judgment. Make an informed choice. Get a second opinion. All of these mean the same thing. Get help. And we all do it. The difference is when people without disabilities, when people who are temporarily able-bodied, as I call us, get help, when we use supported decision-making, we're being smart. We are complimented for not rushing to judgment, for making informed choices. When people with disabilities say, can you explain that to me? Can you help me? For years, for centuries, society's looked down on them and assume that they can't do things. And that has led directly to people with disabilities losing their rights through guardianship or just through assumptions that they can't do things. So supported decision-making, getting help when you need it, allows and empowers people to make decisions for themselves, which leads directly to self-determination, which leads directly to a better quality of life. So here's what we know. about supported decision-making and the ways it can enhance self-determination. I've told you this before, but I never get tired of saying it. We are finding through research that people who do use supported decision-making do have greater self-determination and do have a better quality of life. It's not a theory. In fact, right in Virginia, in a study that was funded by the Virginia Board for People with Disabilities, we worked with 10 young adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We empowered them to use supported decision-making in ways that made sense to them. We didn't make them do it only in one way. There's not one form, there's not one method. We just empowered them and we discussed it with them and their family members. And we said, go make a plan. And when they came back, we said, go with that plan. And then we followed them and collected data for the better part of a year. And what did we find? We found that those who used supported decision-making across the board were more independent, more self-confident, were better at making decisions and made objectively better decisions. And even mid-pandemic, the majority said they were doing more things in the community. So that's what self-determination can do for you. And maybe that's why it has grown so rapidly. Really, the first time supported decision-making burst into public view was when a Virginian named Jenny Hatch, who I had the honor to represent, won her case where a judge said you have the right to use supported decision-making instead of being in guardianship. That was 2013, not even 9 years ago. And just in that time, 14 states and the District of Columbia have passed new laws recognizing supported decision-making. Virginia has changed its law to require courts to consider supported decision-making. Organizations like the US government, the American Bar Association, the National Guardianship Association, and disability-specific groups like the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, the ARC, and the National Alliance of Mental Illness have all endorsed supported decision-making. So with that as our background, wouldn't it be great, second article of faith, wouldn't it be great if there was a program that was available to all people with disabilities that could provide all the benefits of self-determination? And I mean available to all people with disabilities, because so many of the programs that people with disabilities take part in are hard to get into. It's hard to be eligible for special education. You have to pass a screening and have to have a label and have to have triennial reassessments. It's hard to get a Medicaid waiver. Not only do you have to meet criteria, financial and functional, you have to, unfortunately, wait for your number to come up on the waiting list. So wouldn't it be great if there was a program that was available and could do all of the things and could provide all of the benefits of self-determination? Well, I'm here to tell you there is. There is. Vocational Rehabilitation, or VR, is a program that can do all of those things. The whole point of VR is to help people with disabilities get what they need, the supports and services, gain the skills and knowledge they need so they can work. That's all VR does. If there is something that will help a person with a disability prepare for, secure, retain, advance in, or regain employment, in other words, get ready to work, get a job, keep a job, get promoted, or get a job back, then VR can provide it. In fact, VR must provide it. If it's related to work, VR must provide it. So what does that have to do with supported decision-making? We've been talking about guardianship and all. What does that have to do with supported decision-making, guardianship? What does VR come into play? Well, how about this? What if the same things you need to work are the same things you need to live independently and avoid guardianship? What if you need to develop a skill like self-determination, like decision-making in order to work? Well, if you do, then VR must provide it. And then not only do you get the work-based benefits of it, you get the life-based benefits of it. And that's why VR is my favorite program for people with disabilities, because it has more potential to do more good for more people than I think any other program. And here's how we get there. Quick VR primer. To be eligible for VR is Easy. I told you other programs are hard. VR is easy. You are eligible for VR if, one, you have a disability. Two, your disability makes it harder for you to work. They call that a barrier to employment. Three, you want to work. And four, VR services could help you work. That's it. If you get public benefits, SSDI, SSI, Medicaid, etc., you are presumed eligible. So it is hard to be ineligible for VR. In the years I have been working in VR, and God help me, a couple of decades ago, I worked with Heidi and I managed the program at what's now called the Disability Law Center of Virginia that did VR advocacy ever since. To my VR trial that's coming up in 6 weeks, I have never seen or had a person who was ineligible for VR. Because if you have a disability, VR must presume you want to work. And if VR says you're too disabled to work, they can't just say that. They have to give you a chance to work. That's called trial work experience. So it's hard, and you don't have to prove you can work. They have to prove you can't work after giving you several chances to work. So VR, getting in the door, is easy. In Virginia, the VR department is the Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services. I'm going to call that DARS. You can find DARS's website. It's on your screen. You can Google DARS. You can find out how to apply for DARS services. But I am telling you right now, those are the steps you need. Those are the things you have to prove. So to apply, contact your local DARS office. There's a link to their list, or you can call the number on your screen and request an appointment. That's it. Now, two things. This is not going on right now, but there may come a point you hear that. There's a thing called order of selection. And when I used to work in there, DARS would sometimes go on an order of selection. It's kind of like a waiting list. Even if you're found eligible, they don't have to serve you right away, or they have to give priority to people who are the most disabled in choosing who to serve. If you hear that, I still recommend you apply. If DARS tells you, well, you can apply, but we're on the order of selection, you should still apply, because there are things they still have to do to help you. And it's always best if there's going to be a line to get in it. So that's the idea. There are things they have to do and get on the line. But once you're found eligible, and DARS right now, to my knowledge, is not on an order of selection. So if you apply now and you're found eligible, you get what's called an individualized plan for employment. And here's where supported decision-making comes in all through the DARS process. Because what you are supposed to do in your individualized plan for employment is develop a goal, a job goal, the job you want to get with DARS help. And what you're supposed to do is work with DARS to identify your skills and your interests. DARS is not supposed to say, and no VR is supposed to say, you can go to work in Burger King if you want. By the way, nothing wrong with working in Burger King if that's what you want to do. But if you want to be a computer programmer and you have the skills where you can become a computer programmer, DARS is not supposed to say, work at Burger King. So you're supposed to work with DARS, where DARS gives you information on what jobs might fit your skills and your interests, about what opportunities might be out there, so that you and your DARS counselor can choose an employment goal. Think about it. The DARS counselor gives you information about available jobs, available supports, available services. You choose your goal. Doesn't that sound like supported decision-making? So that means that you don't just have to settle for what I call an F job. And across the country, I hear about people complaining about VR organizations pushing people into F jobs. I call them F jobs: food, filth, flyers, and filing. Fast food, janitorial, light office work, and retail services. So you don't have to settle for that. If you want to work in those fields, if after talking with DARS you feel that is appropriate, then of course you can do that. But that's where the support comes in. DARS gives you information to allow you to choose the best job for you. That means you're working together. because an employment goal isn't just wish fulfillment. You can't just pick any goal. DARS does have the right to say, no, we're not going to support you if it's a job that you couldn't do. If I go to DARS and say, I want to be an NFL football player, DARS is going to say, you're a little old for that and you're a little small for that. We're not going to support you and pay money toward you making that goal. But they might say, it sounds like you're interested in sports. Maybe there are jobs out there in the sports world that do fit your skills and your abilities and your interests and appeal to your love of sports. That's supported decision-making. DARS hears your goal, they work with you, they provide you information on what would be a good job to fit those goals. So once you have your goal down, you then work with DARS to create your plan. And your plan is supposed to provide the supports and services you need to reach the goal you want. Let's say again, that my goal is computer programmer and DARS says, yep, you have the skills for that. Well, I'm supposed to work with DARS and say, okay, what's stopping me from getting to that goal? What is stopping me? What's in my way? What do I need? What information, what training, what education, what equipment? And if there are things that I need that I don't have, then DARS is supposed to work with me to identify those things and help me get them. Again, supported decision-making comes into play here because once we agree on the job goal, the idea is for DARS to work with you and help you figure out what you need to get there. And together you identify the supports and services you need. And it's also a responsibility. DARS doesn't have to provide things that aren't going to help you reach your goal. Let's just say I want something that I think is going to make my life better. If it's not directly related to helping me get to my job goal, DARS doesn't have to provide it. So together, you work with DARS, the DARS counselor, giving you information, giving you support, giving you recommendations. So you can ID the job you want, the supports and services you need to get there, and the provider that's going to help you get it. So think for a second. What are some of the things that slow down people with disabilities, that make it harder for people with disabilities to work? What's missing out there? And I got to tell you, before the pandemic, when I would talk to actual live audiences, I would always start a little stopwatch in my head until someone raised their hand and said, transportation. There's no transportation. It usually is about 1/1,000,000th of a second. Someone else would say, there's no job coaches. Someone else would say medical and mental health needs. Someone else would say lack of educational opportunities. Well, DARS can provide all of those. What's on your screen right now is just a sample, a small sample, mind you, of the supports and services DARS can provide if you need them to reach your job goal. Assessments to figure out what you need, counseling to help you figure out how best to get there, job search and on-the-job training and job coaches to help you find the job and perform well at it, medical and mental health care if you have needs in those areas, assistive technology, and yes, transportation. Transportation is a required VR service. If you need transportation to get to your training, to get to your job in order to work, DARS must provide it. If it's work related, DARS can and must provide it. What you're looking at on your screen are just some of the things that I helped people get when I was working in Virginia. These don't appear in the DARS regulations, but they're related to work. Someone needed temporary rent because it's really hard to get a job if you have no fixed address, or clothing that is appropriate for your job, or therapy to help you. And I think that person needed some cognitive behavioral therapy to help him or her be able to perform better on the job. And one time, even dental work was covered as job related. The point is, if it's there to help you go from where you are to the job you've agreed to get with DARS, then VR can and must provide it. This is what I think is the biggest one. If you require vocational or other training and education services, DARS can provide it. So that means college when it's appropriate. That means graduate school, if it's appropriate, if it's related to your job. The best story I can tell you on that is someone I used to work with. She's a lawyer, a really good one. She also had a disability. And she went to her state's version of DARS. It wasn't DARS in Virginia, it was a different state. And she asked them to support her to help her become a lawyer. And they said, that's a lot of time and a lot of money. How about paralegal? And she said, no, I have the ability to be a lawyer. And she did. And DARS supported that. And that means DARS helped her pay for law school. And she became a lawyer. And the last I heard, she was running a program to help people with disabilities in her state. So yes, DARS can help you all the way through the process, so long as what you need is directly related to the job goal you want to get. Now, at this point, someone always thinks to themselves, because this is a scary time, I can't work. If I'm a person with disabilities, I can't work, because if I work, I can lose my benefits. People on SSI, on SSDI, on Medicaid, on food stamps, they can't work, they feel. They've been told all their lives that if they have more than $2,000 to their name, they can lose their benefits. And that's terrifying. If your Medicaid or your waiver is the thing that's keeping you healthy, if it's the thing that, if your SSI or SSDI is the thing that's helping you support your family, of course you're going to be scared to lose it. So I call that $2,000 limit the fiscal cliff. It's what you're afraid of going over, because once you get to $2,001, you're afraid you're going to lose your benefits. And we have studies supporting that. People with disabilities are afraid to work because they think they'll lose the benefits they need that help them stay healthy and help them stay independent. Well, DARS can help with that too. One of the services DARS can provide is what's called benefits counseling. Benefits counseling is designed to help people with disabilities on benefits understand and budget so they can earn as much as they can while keeping their benefits. If you're working with DARS and you're on benefits, you can ask them to refer you to a counselor called a Community Work Incentive Coordinator, or CWIC. The point of the CWIC is to work with you to help you manage your benefits, to help you understand that there are certain expenses that don't count against your benefits, that you can maybe open up a special account that won't count against your benefits. The counselor provides that kind of information so you can make the decision that is best for you so that you can work as best you can. Counselor provides information, you decide. That's supported decision-making. That's the whole point. Rather than being afraid to work, justifiably, there are opportunities to get information that will help you maximize your employment so that you can work while receiving your benefits. And that's the beauty of things that DARS and other VR agencies can do. They work with you. So you have the information you need to maximize your potential. And that's important because VR helps with more than just work. It's not just about work. Remember where we started. Self-determination is what leads to the better life for people with disabilities. Self-determination is having more control over your life, making more decisions is directly related to having a better life, to being more independent, to being more involved in your community, to being better employed, to earning more money, to being healthier and safer. Self-determination is tied to all of that. So where do we get to supported decision-making? As I've shown you all through, we get to supported decision-making through the VR process. Every single step of the way fits the definition of supported decision-making you see on your screen. You're working with the professionals to help you understand your choices, your choice of job goal, your choice of supports and services, your choice to work and keep your benefits to the maximum of your ability. VR calls that informed choice. I always say that informed choice is just another way to say supported decision-making. But when you're talking VR language, you use the phrase informed choice. I sometimes say it's built in, but look at the definition of informed choice on your screen. DARS must inform everyone they're working with in a way that they understand about the availability of supports, the availability of services, all through the system, all through the process, about their options, about what they recommend the person can do, so that the person can make an informed choice about their vocational rehabilitation goals and supports. Informed choices required at every step. Doesn't that sound just like supported decision-making? Doesn't that sound like you working with your DARS counselor to figure out the job goal you want? Doesn't that sound like you working with your DARS counselor to figure out the supports and services and providers you want? Doesn't that sound like working with a CWIC to understand how best to manage your benefits so you can work and continue to get the SSI, SSDI, Medicaid, and other benefits that you need? It's all there, and it all is supported decision-making. I always say that people don't use the phrase supported decision-making because they shouldn't have to. It's just part of who we are. If I've shown you nothing in this process, it's that supported decision-making is part of the VR process, the way it is part of the special education process, the way it ought to be part of everyday life. There's no reason to hang a label on it. It's just part of who we are and what we do. Again, us temporarily able-bodied people don't call it supported decision-making. We call it life. In VR, they don't call it supported decision-making. They call it informed choice, arose by any other name. It flows throughout the system. So remember that. Remember how important self-determination is, starting with our article of faith, that people who are doing more things, making more decisions, have a better life. Remember how informed choice can get us to our decision-making all through the process. And remember this, that means that VR doesn't just give you the chance to exercise supported decision-making. It gives you time after time opportunities to practice supported decision-making. So when we think about the things we need to live an independent life, the things we need to avoid guardianship, one of the things we need is practice. One of the things we need is practice making decisions. Way too often, people with disabilities don't have opportunities to make decisions for themselves. They haven't had a chance to discover the supports they need to make decisions. In VR, through the informed choice process, you are getting time after time an opportunity to practice supported decision-making. From the first time you work with your counselor to figure out your job goal, the counselor gives you information and advice on things that might meet your skills. To when you're choosing your supports and services, the counselor is supposed to give you information on your options for not only the supports, but the providers who can give them to you. To choosing the benefits and opportunities that you're going to pursue. All of these are opportunities to use supported decision-making in a real world site, in a real world opportunity. And remember, there are lots of ways to do it. Remember, we practice supported decision-making all through this. So let's say I've got someone in my life who I work with. Let's say I've got a parent or a friend or someone I want to help me out. That person can be part of the DARS process with me. There is no reason I can't bring my mom or my dad or my friend or my counselor to my meeting with DARS. Of course, you'll have to sign a release giving DARS permission to talk to that person, because DARS is correct that they need to protect your privacy. Or if the person's under guardianship, DARS has to defer to their guardian. The guardian is the decision maker, but the person should be part of the process. It should be a team. So there are many ways to practice VR in SDM. There are many ways to practice and put supported decision-making into effect in the VR process. So we can bring our supporters. Let's say I'm working with a Medicaid waiver or a CSB or a Center for Independent Living. I should be bringing those resources into my DARS meeting so that we can share information and share resources so we can have the best possible system working together. That's a way to do supported decision-making as well. Our overarching goal should be to make sure that the person has the best possible opportunity to make the most possible decisions and get the best possible results. You know why that's important? Going back to guardianship, think about it. I always ask, why do people go into guardianship in the first place? You know, you've heard me say in prior webinars, it's a culture, right? We've got all these years of culture of assuming that people with disabilities can't do things. You know, I found a study that I think says it right. People with disabilities go into guardianship because society thinks they can't take care of themselves. They cannot take care of themselves in an appropriate way. And in fact, most state laws, including Virginia's, essentially say that if a person is unable to take care of his or her life and or property, they need a guardian to the extent that they truly cannot do those things. Well, here's where VR can help too. Because what if the inability to take care of yourself is also what's keeping you from working? What if you're missing certain life skills, and the life skills that drive us toward dependence, that drive us toward guardianship? Let's say I have limitations in self-care, or I'm disorganized, or I have difficulty communicating with others, or my interpersonal skills are lacking. What if I'm lacking those life skills and I can go to VR and say, I need help with those skills so I can work? Well, I have had many VRs tell me, wait a second, we can't help you with those. Those aren't employment skills. Those are life skills, self-care and organization and communication, interpersonal skills. And I will tell you, the same way I have cross-examined VR people, would you hire someone who is so disorganized or has such difficulty staying on task that they won't be able to follow your policy? Would you promote someone who has difficulty communicating or getting along with customers and coworkers? Would you retain someone who takes such poor care of him or herself that they're always getting sick and missing work or getting their customers and coworkers sick? Of course not. Well, if you wouldn't do those things, then those are employment skills. Those are things keeping you from working just as much as they are keeping you from taking care of yourself. They're stopping you from getting a good job. So if that's the case, if those things are limiting a person in employment, then DARS has to provide the supports and services to help you overcome them. It doesn't matter that it's just a life skill. If it's also an employment skill, DARS must help you overcome those limitations. And again, think about all of those supports and services DARS can provide. And think about how they can help a person who is difficulty with self-care. Look, medical and mental health care is a required DARS service. What about a person who has difficulty with organization? Look, job coaches are right there to help a person stay on task. What about a person who has difficulty with interpersonal or communication skills? Look, assistive technology and counseling are available to people to help them overcome these quote unquote life skills limitations. Of course, they're job skills. So if you believe that you or the person you support is having limitations in those areas and they're keeping you from working, then yes, DARS can and must provide the supports and services needed to overcome those limitations. How? Supported decision-making. Because they are supposed to work with you to figure out the things that you need to overcome those limitations, figuring out the appropriate support and service, the technology, the medical mental health care, the education and training, the counseling, the job coach, the transportation, help you choose the support that will address the limitation so that you can progress. That's informed choice. That's supported decision-making. So put it together. You can work with DARS using supported decision-making all the way across the DARS system to help you identify the jobs and job goals that match your skills and interests, to help you identify the supports and services that will help you overcome your barrier to getting that job, and to help you access those supports and services by picking the provider and how you work with them. Supported decision-making works all the way through, and that gets you two things: the skills you need to become employed and the skills you need to take care of yourself in a way that society believes is appropriate, and therefore avoid guardianship if it's unnecessary. That's what VR can do for people. It can help you get what you need to work and to live independently at the same time. Some things to remember. Remember, even though you're working with DARS, it is a supported decision-making, informed choice situation. In other words, they don't have to approve your request. DARS can say your job goal is unreasonable. They can say the supports you want aren't necessary. If I say I want to go to college, but my job goal does not require a college degree, then DARS doesn't have to support college education. If DARS says no to you, and you think they should have supported it, they should have approved that job goal, they should have approved that supporter service, then you do have a right to appeal. Under federal and state law, you have a right to say DARS was wrong. Again, there's an entire section of the Disability Law Center of Virginia that's there for that purpose, to help you advocate when you think that DARS is wrong. So it's not, DARS doesn't have the final say. If you're looking for a particular supporter service and DARS says we're not going to do that, you can appeal that decision and you have a right to have a hearing. There are many types of DARS appeals. You can do it informally by simply meeting with DARS personnel and essentially asking them to change their mind. You can go through mediation where DARS pays a mediator to come in and try to help you resolve your differences. Or you can go to trial, an impartial due process hearing, a legitimate trial with a hearing officer where you are required to provide evidence, where you can try to prove that DARS was wrong. And if the hearing officer rules against you, you can even go to court, federal court in some cases, to say the hearing officer was wrong. So if you believe that you were right and DARS was wrong, you do have the option to challenge DARS. So if you want to file, if that happens, and it does happen, even in the best of intentions, sometimes DARS gets it wrong. Again, I've filed many appeals back when I was in Virginia against DARS, then called DRS, and right now in other states where I practice. I've got a VR case coming up first week in May. So I can tell you, if you want to file an appeal, there's nothing wrong with that. I do recommend you get help though. I recommend you contact the Disability Law Center of Virginia. They have a program called CAP. CAP can at least give you information about how to appeal. They may be able to represent you. Can't guarantee that, but it's worth asking. And then you can follow the steps in the appeal process. I strongly recommend that when you file an appeal, you tell DARS that what you're appealing. Give them a copy of the decision where they said, we're not going to do this for you. When you file the appeal, you say, I think they were wrong and I want this decision overturned. I also recommend if you need any kind of accommodation, you make sure that's in your appeal request. I just came through a case where my client needed not one, but 2 sign language interpreters. We put that request in the appeal writing that she had to have an American Sign Language interpreter and a expressive sign language interpreter, because that's how she communicated. And DARS has to pay for that. You don't have to bring your own accommodation. So make sure you have what you need to make your case as well as possible. So here's how we can put everything I taught you together. I want to tell you a VR story about a person I worked with in DC. This is not a Virginian. So his name is Vinay. He gave me the okay to use his name. So Vinay was 18 years old. He had graduated high school. He had an intellectual disability. He applied for VR in Washington, DC. Okay, the VR in DC was called RSA, the Rehabilitation Services Administration. So RSA, he went through the application process. He showed that he had a disability. He said he wanted to work. He said the disability made it harder to work. And he thought that VR could help him get the things he needed to work. And sure enough, RSA reviewed him and said, you do have limitations. And they specifically said, your limitations that are stopping you from working are your interpersonal skills, your communication, your organization skills, and your self-care. They identified those as his main barriers to employment. So they said to Vinay, we need to find a job goal for you. What do you want to be? And Vinay used supported decision-making. He wasn't 100% sure what he wanted to do, but he talked with RSA about what he was interested in. He didn't call it supported decision-making. RSA didn't call it supported decision-making. They called it informed choice. It was the same thing. They worked together. He went through assessments to look at his interests and his possible skills, and they agreed he'd make a good physical therapist. So he wanted to go into physical therapy. However, RSA and Vinay both agreed he would need additional training before he could do that. He needed a certification. He needed hands-on experience. He needed to learn about physical therapy. So RSA said, you need to find a place that can teach you the things you need to learn so you can overcome your barriers and become a physical therapist. And again, that was supported decision-making. They said, here are the things you should be looking for. Try to find some place that has it. And Vinay did that. Using RSA's information, he went and found a specialized school in New York. That school was out of DC. It was in New York. It had a specialized curriculum around physical therapy. It was a residential school, obviously, if he's from DC and it was in New York. But here was the good part about the residential school, is he was learning about physical therapy during the day. And during the evenings and during the weekends, the school taught life skills training to things like taking care of himself, making sure he took his medication, staying organized, using transportation, working with other people, and interpersonal skills. So when Vinay came back to RSA and said, this is the school I want to go to, they originally said, that sounds great, until they saw how much it cost. And they said, we're not going to pay for that. We don't think we need to pay for that. So what did Vinay do? He appealed. Just like I told you, he has the right to do that. He appealed the decision and said, you should have paid for this school because it's got what I need to become employed. So we went to trial. RSA said they wouldn't pay for it. They wouldn't pay for it because of the independent living skills stuff. They said, this is not for work. This self-care and this budgeting and transportation and taking your medication, that's not related to being a physical therapist. And we said, of course it is. Because if Vinay isn't taking care of himself, if he doesn't know how to get to and from the job, how is he going to get a job as a physical therapist? If he doesn't know how to budget his money and pay his rent and take care of his health, he's not going to keep his job for very long. We actually had an expert witness to say that people who don't have those skills are much less likely to get jobs and stay employed. So we said this school that had the very things that, remember, RSA said he needed. RSA said that Vinay needed to work on his interpersonal skills, his organization, his self-care. RSA said physical therapist was a good job. So Vinay used their support and identified that job. And when they said no, he fought for his rights. And sure enough, the judge ruled in his favor. The judge ruled that Vinay was right. He said that Vinay needed fundamental training in basic skills. Remember that VR has to pay for things that help you prepare for work. So he needed those things before he could become a productive employee. He needed to learn the self-care and interpersonal skills and organizational skills that RSA said were more important. He needed to learn the independent living skills that would help him become employed. So the hearing officer said, as I told you earlier, those independent living skills for Vinay were specifically related to work. And because they were, RSA had to provide them. So in that way, Vinay gained what he needed to get employed and live independently. P.S. He's living independently and working today, about 6 years later. So you can see how supported decision-making helped him get to where he needed to be and also helped him learn about his rights so he could defend it. A few more things to talk about. One of the things that's most important about VR, one of my favorite things about VR, is it's available to everyone. I started there. It's available to everyone. There is no age limit for VR. If you're 85 or 90 years old and you meet the criteria for VR, they have to serve you. There is no upper limit. but VR is particularly effective for kids who are in school. If you are a parent and you have a kid in special education in high school, VR could be incredibly helpful if you know what they have to do and you advocate for it. So the first thing to realize is that VR should work with kids in school. A lot of times I'm asked, well, when does VR start? I think VR starts as early as possible. So if you are in what we call the transition age, 14 and up, I think VR should be directly involved in school, and the law says the same thing. There's a law called WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act. It gave VR a whole bunch of money specifically to serve youth with disabilities. There has been a law for years, decades actually, that says VR must become involved in special education as early as possible. Way back when, then called DRS, VR in Virginia, when I was working in Virginia, they had a policy that said they didn't want to work with any school kids who were under 18. They would have an informal policy, which was if someone applied for VR, they would say, come back to us the semester before you graduate. We had to threaten a class action lawsuit because how can that be as early as possible? How can 6 months before you leave be as early as possible? So VR now recognizes they have to become involved as early as possible. And if you are working with a special education team, an IEP team, and you invite VR, they have to come to your meeting. VR should be part of your IEP planning because employment is a key part of life. If you remember the last time we were together, I told you how one of the key responsibilities of special education is employment. They should be working with VR. So if VR is invited, they have to come to the meeting, which takes me to one of my favorite parts of special education. It's called pre-ETS. You probably haven't been told about it or haven't been told enough because there's not enough information out there about it. So let me tell you, pre-ETS stands for Pre-Employment Transition Services. And the amazing thing about pre-ETS is it's available to all students with disabilities. That's what the law says. So if there is a student with an IEP or a 504 plan, any student who's getting disability-related services in school, special education or 504, they are entitled to pre-ETS from DARS. Let's go through what's involved in pre-ETS, and I think you'll see why I think this is an amazing opportunity for young adults. One, VR has to provide job exploration counseling, helping kids start to think about or identify jobs they might want to get, maybe having work-based learning experience like internships or opportunities to learn about work, developing work skills. They are required to provide information about post-secondary education. So things like college or training schools so that kids can start to think about what they want for their educational future. They are required to help students develop social skills and independent living skills. Remember, those are work skills. So if you're a student, if you're a child, if the person you support needs help developing those skills to work and be independent, DARS should be working with your student to provide them as early as possible. And instruction in self-advocacy, the things that can teach people what they need to advocate for themselves, to be part of a person-centered planning process, to connect with peers and other organizations, to learn as much as possible. DARS is part of all of that, or should be part of all of that, so that you have everything you need and every opportunity as young as possible. So DARS is something that's available throughout life. That's one of the reasons why I think DARS is so great. Special education ends. You're in special education to a maximum of age 21. You're going to be alive another 60 years, and DARS should be there to pick up the supports and services needed so you can work and at the same time be as independent as possible. And that's where I want to finish up today with that message. DARS is there to help you get what you need to get the job that best suits you so you can have the most productive, most independent life possible. And flowing through all of it is supported decision-making. you're not going to have the best possible DARS experience unless you're using supported decision-making. DARS is not going to meet its legal responsibilities unless it's giving you opportunities to use supported decision-making. And supported decision-making, as we know, is directly linked to self-determination, which is going to help you be more employed, make more money, and be more independent.